All he could taste was dirt. Dry, coarse dirt. He wasn't sure how long he'd been like this either. As he tried to lift his arms up, he felt dirt shifting around them. It took a bit, but he slowly clawed through the dirt until he could feel them break through the soil and into the air. Then he began to kick and twist his legs as he tried to drag more dirt away from his face. When he finally cleared away the dirt from his eyes, he opened them to see the full moon hanging in the night sky before him. Slowly, but surely, he pushed and twisted to wriggle and dig himself up out of the ground until he could finally roll out of the shallow grave. For several minutes he lay there, gasping hard as he tried to catch his breath. He was tired, more tired than he'd ever been before. He wasn't even sure he had the energy to push himself up to see feet. His lips were dry and cracked, and his tongue felt like sandpaper in his mouth. But he needed to get up. He had to get up. Even as he tried to push down, though his arms wobbled and gave out as he flopped back down into the dirt. Groaning in pain and dismay, he tried once more, but again he couldn't do it, and lay on the dusty top of the plateau. He closed his eyes, but tried not to fall asleep. He wasn't sure if he could wake up again this time. He just lay there, listening. The far-off call of a sweeper, the buzz of some elk beetles, and even the chittering of some lava lizards. It was peaceful here. Too peaceful. He couldn't give in to the gentle noise trying to lull him back into an endless sleep. So he tried to push himself up one more time. He got part way up and then collapsed yet again as he let out a frustrated scream which used most of his remaining energy. Once more, all he could taste was dirt. He wasn't sure how long he lay there, his ribs creaking and groaning with every breath. But then, to his great surprise, a canteen dropped in front of his face. He flinched a bit, though all he could do was move his face. Even as he reached out to take it, he paused and looked up. Before him was a figure that caught him off guard. He wore a black cassock with red trim and a long crimson sash wrapped around his waist, along with a pistol. Even religious folk carried irons around here. What was a father doing out here? He'd never seen the red before. Was he a cardinal, or even a saint? What will it cost? He asked as he slowly closed his dirty, cut-up hands around the canteen. The water shall cost nothing. Water always costs something out here, friend, he croaked out, coughing up a bit more dirt. It shall cost you but a moment of time to listen to a proposal then. The gunslinger hesitated and then unscrewed the cap before taking a first small sip, then a bigger sip. Finally, he started to just drink it all. The water was as clean and clear as crystal. It was so cold he could swear he was drinking from a snow well. It was so cold it almost hurt his parched, dry throat as he drank it down. It was like the water was breathing new life into him as all the aches and pains in his body faded away. When the canteen had run dry, he finally had the energy to slowly push himself up and onto his feet. Though he felt a bit shaky, still he tried to get a look at the figure's face, but for some reason he couldn't. It was like his head was covered in a dark shroud that couldn't be pierced by the light of the full moon above. It looks like you walked into an ambush. That it does. The gunslinger looked around the top of the plateau. The bodies of the marauders he had slain were gone, but that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that they even bothered to toss him into a shallow grave. He had heard they liked to use up the bodies as fertilizer, but there weren't any plants here for his body to sustain. Did you take my guns? Your rifle, but not your pistol. The figure extended a long, rather thin arm and pointed when the gunslinger noticed the black gloves on the priest's hand. Turning, he slowly staggered over to the rock the figure had pointed at, and sure enough, there was his iron, being covered by the rock. He clicked open the cylinder and spun it out as he pulled the cases free. He had one bullet left, and it had his name carved into the middle. A gift from his son, so that he'd always be holding the bullet with his name on it, to keep him safe. He tucked it into his chest pocket by his heart. What's the proposition? It's simple. I give you a new glider and a bullet. The gunslinger looked around the plateau, but he already knew that his glider would be gone. Not even marauders would leave behind a good bluestone glider. If not to use, then to tear apart for the bits inside. And what will this cost me? The figure was quiet for a few seconds, as if considering the cost before it finally spoke once more. Everything. The gunslinger had a feeling it would cost him that. He looked down at the gun in his hand and thought about his family, so far away and so vulnerable without him. Deal. He extended his hand then, and the figure slowly raised his in turn. As the gunslinger reached out to shake hands, he gasped softly at just how cold the figure's hands were. How could they be that cold, especially with gloves on? He shivered a little as it felt like a line of frost ran down his spine, and then the figure let go. Reaching down to the holster on his waist, the figure pulled free a bullet and handed it to the gunslinger, who quickly loaded it into his pistol before tucking. And the glider? He asked as the figure reached up and slid the straps off his back. The straps had been so perfectly black they blended in with the figure's cassock, so he hadn't seen it. Take mine. I have more. When the figure unslung the glider and swung it around to hand it to the gunslinger, he was taken aback by the look of it. He had seen a few fancy ones before, usually brass with inlaid gems or stained glass. But his looked like the main casing was carved from a single giant skull, a flying serpent skull based on the teeth jutting out of the bottom. It was beautiful in a haunting way. How will you collect? When will you collect? I shall collect when and where it is appropriate. Of course. The gunslinger sighed for a moment and shook his head. Doesn't matter. The deal was still worth it. I'll see you around then. He was about to turn and walk away when the figure spoke again. You should take the canteen. You might need it. It's empty, the gunslinger said with a shrug. Is it? As the figure asked that, the gunslinger hesitated and then reached down to pick up the canteen once more. But when he straightened up, the figure was gone. He looked all around the plateau. He couldn't see any signs of him. Just the remains of the marauder camp he'd been hired to clear. The camp that had been waiting for him. But were they waiting for him truly? Or anyone? It was hard to say. After opening the canteen once more, he found more water inside. Confused but still thankful for the mystery, the gunslinger took a few more deep gulps and then splashed some on his face to try and wash away at least a little dirt. With that done, he pulled the strap for the canteen over his shoulder and then reached down into the dirt of his own grave. After a moment of digging, he pulled out his hat, batting it against his leg to knock most of the dirt off before setting it on his head. After that, he looked around the plateau trying to get his bearings. The distant horizon was starting to glow orange-red with the coming of a new dawn, and once he finally saw the top sliver of the sun, he set it to his back, facing away from it. He ran then straight at the edge of the plateau and jumped as he reached the edge. Triggering the wings, they snapped out of the glider strapped to his back as he fell towards the lava below. He caught one of the many updrafts to carry him back up to land on the next pillar, in the sea of lava run across it, and jump once more. On he ran, jumping and diving off the edge of pillar after pillar. He was no stranger to crossing the broken spires. Sometimes he could catch a longer draft, spinning through the air as the winds carried him forward. The pack was lighter than he expected, given the size. It hardly seemed to weigh upon him at all, though that might just be his mind set onto the distant task he was running towards. Once, long ago, he had relished this sort of travel, to almost fly free as a bird, twist and drift between the currents of air that carried his wings. But that was nothing but long-dead memories in the depths of his mind now. The sun at his back began to climb higher as he ran, the flat, barren plateaus of the spires giving him no protection from the heat that began to steadily rise. Even when he jumped and dived, the winds coursing around him were hot swells from the lava below and did little to cool him off. But he didn't care. His lips could crack and his tongue run dry all over again, but it wouldn't stop him. Not now. Not this time. The sun was high, beating down upon him when he finally saw the smoke in the distance. Smoke where there shouldn't be any. He adjusted his course a little, though he didn't have to change it much. It was one of the larger plateaus in the area. A small dry pond at the center surrounded by bigger boulders and rocks that filled in the rain season. Some gnarled, twisted bone trees surrounding the pond. Twisted and evil as they looked, he'd seen their beauty and splendor when they bloomed. But the next rain wasn't for months. As he got closer, he could hear that distant sound. The crack and pop of rifles, the boom of a cannon, and the snap and whistle of the marauder staffs. He picked up his pace a little, wondering if these were the ones who had ambushed him. Perhaps his journey would be over already. When he landed on the edge of the spire, he began to creep between the boulders, hoisting his pistol in his hand, aware that he only had 2 bullets. One, really, since he didn't dare use the one with his name on it yet. He could hear the shouting ahead as the battle raged on while he navigated the maze of boulders that shielded the dry pond bed in the middle. He rounded a rock and then pressed himself back against it as he saw a marauder before him crouch behind a rock up ahead. It would peek over the top, tilting its staff before it would snap and whistle as a blue bolt shot forth, then hunker back down to wait for the crystals set into the shaft to spin back into place. The gunslinger never trusted the damn things. A gun he could understand, but that thing... He wasn't the only one to be stumped by them, of course. Ever since the old kingdoms had first set foot on this new land, they had been beset by marauders. No one knew what they were. They scurried and crawled in so very many different ways, some on all 4s, others on 6, though many on just 2, but with odd numbers of appendages either way. Small arms or what looked to be amputated limbs sticking out at odd angles. Their twisted, broken faces hidden behind the intricate mask stitched together with the hair of the humans they killed. How could one define a species that seemingly had no set order, size, or build? The raids and attacks had been light at first around the first landings and early colonies, but once the settlers had discovered Bluestone and the properties it held, like the ability to lift ships out of the water and above the lava, well, that had led to an explosion of growth and far more marauders down from the north. No one knew where they came from. No expedition to the crown had ever returned. But for now, the gunslinger was less focused on history and more on the immediate threat before him. This one had just 2 arms and 2 legs, or at least the thick wool of his poncho and wrappings were only cut with holes for 2 arms and 2 legs. There might be smaller ones underneath. He waited for it to peek up over the top of the rock once more and rushed closer. It had just fired when he was behind it, yanking back hard on its oily black hair and jamming his pistol up under his chin as he pulled the trigger. The blue blood and green-gray brains that splattered across the gunslinger was quickly ignored as he kicked the body out from behind the rock so he could duck behind it and use it for cover himself. Holstering his pistol, he then grabbed the marauder's staff, letting the crystal spin back into place while he peered over the top of the rock to see what was going on. Ahead, almost in the middle of the pond, was a frigate. Crashed hard from the looks of things, cracked and broken into the ground and leaning heavily to the side. Looked to be a wood one with a few iron plates slapped on the side. Not a proper iron ship then. Soldiers were huddled around it, firing in all directions as more marauders peppered them with blue bolts from the rocks and trees around them. In the center, he could see an officer with more courage than sense, holding the stars and strikers aloft in her hand and a pistol in the other as she directed fire. Even now, she wasn't ready to let the good old red, white, and black fall to the earth. Out front was a cannon they had apparently salvaged. but the crew was taking too much fire to get out and load it again. The gunslinger looked at his new staff and saw that the crystals were finally lined up. He turned to his left then and waited to see another marauder mass pop up from the rock down the way. When he did, he thumbed a small gem at the center of the staff and felt it jerk in his hands. As it snapped with a whistle, the blue bolt shot straight out and into the marauder's face. There was a hiss and a flash from the impact as the mass shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces, and the face behind it was burned into a charred lump. Then he ducked back down. He reached out to grip one of the crystals with his left hand, hissing out as his flesh burned, but he turned it forward faster to bring them all into alignment yet again. Leaning up, he took aim once more and saw another mask for a moment before he fired yet again, turning a marauder's face into a charred lump. By now they realized what was going on. There was hissing and clicking, even some loud whistles and piercing wails as they communicated what was going on. He kept low and moved away from the rock he was behind then as he heard more snaps and whistles as bolts slammed into the rock he'd just been behind. Moving around to the left, he circled some bigger boulders and peeked around to see a cluster of marauders in the distance. These must be the ones suppressing the cannon, he figured, as he could see them working in tandem to always have a staff ready to fire as each one would pop out in sequence. He needed to time this right, because if he shot one, then the others could just turn and focus on him, and he'd never be able to get another shot off without one of them being ready for it. So he watched them closely for a minute. 4 arms on the left, twin tail next to him, blue mask further right, and red legs to start charging his staff again. And then he pulled out of cover and ran straight at the cluster. He resisted the urge to yell since that would just give him away and managed to be nearly upon the first marauder when he turned and saw the gunslinger. Redleg hissed and licked in surprise, but the gunslinger was jamming the tip of his captured staff into the marauder's gut as he thumbed the gem. This time, instead of a snap and a whistle, it was a snap and a loud, wet pop as the marauder's torso exploded in a shower of blue blood and guts. But the gunslinger once again ignored that and grabbed Redleg's staff, swiftly leveling it at the blue mask and thumbing the trigger to shoot the next marauder in the back.